4-year-old granddaughter, Casey, will tell you that Marshall wears red and rides around in a fire truck. And Sky wears pink and flies around in the air.
Yes.
Is this right?
Uh-huh.
Yes?
Yeah, you're good.
Am I good so far? And Rocky wears green, and Rubble wears yellow. And she'll even tell you that Tracker wears dark green. Am I right?
Yes.
And that Everest wears teal. Now, some of y'all are looking at me like, what in the world are you talking about? Because you don't know Paw Patrol.
Paw Patrol.
She will also tell you that Zuma wears orange. But Zuma is the only pup of all of them that she also identifies by his color and not just the color he wears. Zuma is a chocolate lab. And Casey will tell you that Zuma is black. Zuma is not a black lab. He's a chocolate lab. And Casey tells you he's black like Peepaw, her grandfather. See, this is how we start confusing kids at a very early age and giving them messages about race. Casey, for the longest time, even now, is confused about black and brown because we confuse them. And we don't tell them why this brown is black, but every other brown is brown. So these are the kinds of messages that we send our children. And I believe that the way forward with race is to talk about it, not to pretend that it doesn't exist. So I've had lots of opportunities with my grandchildren. I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but first I have some caveats. Today, in this session, we're not going to talk about unconscious bias. We're not going to talk about intersectionality. We're not going to talk about white privilege. I will mention white fragility, but just for a split second. We're not here to talk about those very important issues because those conversations often happen in other sorts of sessions where people are already bought in. I want to talk about those opportunities we have in our everyday lives that we avoid when it comes to race. And I want to talk about having some ways that we can have those conversations in our everyday lives. I also know, and I'm going to pretend, I also know that race is not just about skin color, but I'm going to pretend today that it is. I also know that that the race issues in the U.S. are not just black and white, but we're going to sort of talk as if they are. And we're not going to argue about what the meaning of race is. We're not going to have that conversation today, even though there are lots of different meanings of the word. We're going to use the commonly held meaning of race when we talk about race. So, in the 15 years that since I first began talking about diversity and inclusion issues, this is what I found, is that people can talk about those high-minded things, but have a hard time in their everyday lives talking about race. So that's what we're going to do today. My own race talk got personal when I started talking with my white grandchildren. So my wife and I have 10 grandchildren, and 9.5 of them are white. I'm not going to explain that right now. If you want to ask me about it later, we can get into all that. And so I've had lots of opportunity to talk with them and to learn some things about race. 7 of those white grandchildren have lived in my home. 4 of them live in my home now. So we've had lots of these opportunities. Casey is one of them, not Zuma. Well, Zuma does live in my house too. But in fact, we have several Zumas. This was the one I could find for the picture. 4.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to do a TEDx talk just outside Nashville, Tennessee, where I live. It's called What I've Learned from My White Grandchildren, Truths About Race. And in 4.5 years, it now has over 1 million views, which didn't come all at once. The first year, there were 5,000 views. And in the second year, there were 15,000. In the third year, there were 50,000. And in the fourth year, 1 million. And there are reasons for that. Sometimes that's how things go viral. But do y'all remember, that was 2014 when I did that TED Talk. And I thought it was really important to talk about race in those days. You remember 2014? Do you think we're still living in the same racial culture as we were in 2014? So I think the need for these conversations is even greater than it was when I gave that talk. So let's start talking. Damon was 5 years old when he asked his Aunt Kimberly the question, "Lily, am I black or am I white?" So Aunt Lily said to him, a little simplistically, "Well, your mama's white and your daddy's white, so you're white." And Damon wasn't really satisfied with that answer. He said, "Well, when I grow up, I'm going to be black." So Damon wasn't confused by his basic colors. So why would a 5-year-old ask such a strange question? He already knew that it mattered, and at 5 years old, he'd already attached value to race. Here's Damon now. In fact, he's probably doing that right now because I'm missing his basketball tournament right now. But that's him at 15. So Damon and Casey have a cousin named Elliot, and when Elliot was 4, he was obsessed with the human body. And it's not that normal 4-year-old obsession with body parts. This is his obsession. So he could tell you all about the digestive system, the part that the esophagus plays, and the stomach, and the large and small intestines. He could tell you about the respiratory system, the part the lungs play, and the diaphragm, and he would tell you that the brain is the control center for the entire body. And when he was 4, he drew this picture. One day he was sort of lecturing me about the body and told me all those things, and I stopped him mid-lecture and I said, Elliot, I have a question for you. What color is my skin? And without even looking at me, he said black. And then I said, what color is your skin? And he paused, and then he said, gray? Gray. So if we pay attention, we can catch our kids in mid-indoctrination. He had learned that my brown skin is supposed to be called black, but he hadn't yet been schooled in what to call the color of his own skin. And again, no one had told him why this brown is black and why that pinkish color is supposed to be called white. This is how we know that race matters. So in her recent book, Raising White Kids, Jennifer Harvey has some advice for parents who are raising white kids. And she likes to talk about race consciousness. And what she encourages for parents of white kids is that they notice and help their children notice and name race early and often. And this is something that folks who are not white have to do all the time. So she's encouraging white parents to do that as well. Interestingly, 7-year-old Zoe, Casey and Damon's sister, saw Jennifer Harvey's book while I was preparing for this. And she said, Peepaw, some people have funny names for books. She said, this book is called Raising White Kids. I think that's funny. And so I took Dr. Harvey's advice, And I said, so Zoe, do you know why this book was written? And she shrugged her shoulders. And I said, you know, a lot of white folks, I didn't say folks, a lot of white people, I said to her, think of themselves as normal and think of everyone else as different. And I said, now, you don't think that way because you have a black grandfather and we talk about black and white. And you go to a school where there are a lot of brown people and just a few white people. So you know what it's like to be normal and you know what it's like to be different. And your friends at school know what it's like to be normal and know what it's like to be different. But there are some white people who know what it's like to be normal and see everyone else as different. And that's why this book was written. So there she is reading another book, and I hope this video works for y'all because this is just for fun. This is the book she's reading. Can you see that?
White fragility.
Yeah. It came in the mail that day, and she wanted to read it, so I didn't argue with it. So Allie Michael and Eleonora Bartoli did a study of white parents and their white adolescent children, and they interviewed the families both together and separately. So they interviewed parents and kids together, and then they interviewed parents and they interviewed kids. And this is what they found. The parents said they taught their children, do not be racist, do not talk about race, do not use the word black, and do not notice racial differences. So they wanted to teach their children that everyone is the same and that racism is bad. And they defined racism as overt, violent, and for the most part, obsolete. This was 2014. Many people believed that in 2014. But the kids, when they were interviewed, say this is what they were taught. They were taught that everyone is the same, that race is superfluous, and that hard work alone translates into success. That's how people get success. And they also talked about some views that they had learned about certain racial groups. They learned black people are lazy, black people are poor, black neighborhoods are dangerous, and black people are physically stronger than white people. Now, I don't assume that that these racial mixed messages that we send kids only are in white families. So the mixed messages we send transcend our families. So it was year 2000, and my dad had just passed, and we were in Columbus, Ohio to bury him. And my wife had driven up our family van to shuttle folks around she drove up from Nashville to Columbus, Ohio to shuttle folks around. So after this ceremony, we were having a meal at my cousin's apartment. So I'm driving the van, my white wife is sitting in the passenger seat, and in the back is my black mom, my 3 black siblings, and two of my black uncles. And we pull up to the apartment complex for this meal, and there's a car in front of us, and there's an older white couple getting out of the car, and they're taking longer than we liked. And one of the passengers in the car, who I won't name, said, "You see this? They know we're here. White people always do this." And then all the chatter in the van kind of silenced. And this anonymous relative broke the silence, and he said, "Oh, Laura," that's my wife, "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that." And we laughed, and we laughed, and we still laugh. We laughed because we know he didn't mean that. We know that's not even how he thinks, but sometimes we express racial views for a variety of reasons, even things that we don't believe. Sometimes we do it to bond. And this, did I say who, did I slip out who it was? Okay, this relative was he had moved away from the family. He was here for the ceremony. He was bonding with the family, forgetting my white wife who drove the van all the way up from Nashville, Tennessee to shuttle you around. Too often, when it comes to race or ethnicity or color, we only talk about it we don't talk about it in mixed company, and we don't talk about it in public places. But it still comes up when something is going on in our culture, and O.J. Simpson trial, 9/11, Charlottesville, Charleston, travel bans, border walls, something like that happens, DACA repeal, and we start talking about these things, and sometimes we hear from folks who might even be close to us who express things that we never knew they believed. And we realize that race does matter. And children who have been taught to be colorblind are left blindsided because we don't talk about these things.